Oh, thank you, Mama Ela Gandhi, for being on my podcast channel called The Mindful Conversationalist. It's such an honor to have you here, and I'm so grateful to have you in this podcast to have a conversation with me. So, welcome.
Thank you. And it's a pleasure, and pleasure
Okay.
to be on this channel.
Yeah. So going back, like I know Mama Ela Gandhi from Religions for Peace, apart from the historical legacy of Mahatma Gandhi. But yeah, and we've been working together at Religions for Peace as a senior religious leader and a interfaith youth, and it's been wonderful working with you in these past few years.
Thank you.
So, Mama, would you tell me a little bit about yourself so our audience can get to know you? Share a little bit about your childhood and early influences and what it was like growing up as the granddaughter of Mahatma Gandhi.
Oh, I grew up at the Phoenix settlement, and for a number of years, in my early childhood, we went through all the routine that Gandhiji had set in the ashram. It was Phoenix settlement where I grew up. And my parents were very much influenced by his ideas and so on. Being, of course, his son, my father was, always following the same routine that Gandhiji had set in all the other ashrams in India. Phoenix settlement was his first ashram, and it was in South Africa. And at that time, he was still a very young person. He set it up in 1904, and he was born in 1869. So you can calculate, how old he was when he set up the Phoenix settlement. And it was at Phoenix settlement that he began to experiment with the ideas that he developed further in India after he left South Africa in 1914. So for the 10 years that, Phoenix settlement was under his control and influence, he himself, having given up, a luxurious lifestyle in the middle of the city and coming to live in simplicity in a communal setting and so on at Phoenix settlement, he began to look at life differently. To look at, how can he contribute to the, to the welfare of others, to the improving of life of other people, particularly the poorest of the poor. And so his first thought was, let me go and live amongst the poor. Let me look at the kind of life that they lead. And from there we can, begin to look at how can we bring about changes. So that is what happened at Phoenix. And some of the key features of growing up at Phoenix was about environment. We didn't have electricity. We didn't have running water at the time. So we had to harvest water from the rains. And we began to learn how precious water was by, having to harvest it. And so that was the first thing, conservation of water and harvesting of water. The second thing was electricity. We didn't have electricity, so we had to generate our own supply. And we used, initially the paraffin and wooden coal fire stoves and so on. Then there was the whole question of how to, deal with waste. So, conserving as much as we can and reducing the waste so that, we don't have too much to throw away. And we didn't throw away anything. In fact, we put it all into making compost. And so we learned about compost and about, hygienic toilet facilities and so on. So those were some of the early experiments on Phoenix. And we lived with all those, you know, uh, sort of standards that he had set at Phoenix Settlement. Um, and he, particularly was very finicky about hygiene, not throwing water outside and, using the wastewater for other, recycling it. And so we learned how to keep the place clean. So no flies and no smell and so on. Even the removal of, our sanitation and that sort of thing. We, learned, we dug holes and, it was buried. And so all those things became part of our life growing up at Phoenix. Because one of the things that my parents also taught us is that everyone had to do everything. There was no specific person responsible for any particular jobs. So we had to learn to do everything, all the cleaning, all the work that needed to be done. We all shared the responsibility. And there was no such thing as gender differences in terms of work. Everybody did everything. My brother had to work with us, and so all the responsibilities were kind of, you know, um, shared amongst all of us. And that was a very useful, very important lesson in early childhood because then, we sort of got rid of patriarchy, never thought of such things. My brother, was very helpful in the kitchen, did other chores and everything. And my mom, even helped with the press responsibilities. So, and, my dad would work in the house as well. He was very interested in decorating the house, keeping it clean, and all that sort of thing. So we'll see both my parents working, and it was an interesting and a very um, good learning experience for me. And it was only when I got out into the normal system that I realized how terrible the system was, where there was patriarchy entrenched, where people would laugh at men who worked in the kitchen and so on. Um, but we overcame all those things. We said, no, our way of life was a better way of life. So that was the early part of my life learning at Phoenix. And these were Gandhiji's ideas that we learned about. My parents always taught me not to kind of, you know, um, worship a person, So he was my grandfather, and that's how I looked at him. It wasn't like he was such a great person or anything, but his ideas were great. And that's what we learned, these ideas. Those were the things that we looked at and learned. But the person, he was my grandfather, and that's how we, grew up to consider him. And that's how he wanted us to be. When I actually saw him, when I went to India, he always spared time to talk to us, and he spoke to us as any grandfather would. But he actually spent quite a bit of time with us on a daily basis, despite his busy schedule and all the important things that he had to do. He still spent time with the children, who were there with him in the ashram. So those are my very, you know, important experiences. I think that they are good lessons for people today, especially when we look at gender-based violence, when we look at, the crime-ridden society. You realize that the compassion, the equity, respecting all people, those are the things that build a good society. And so those were lessons in early childhood that I learned.
That's so beautiful. And there's something like, when I think about all the stories you shared, I heard similar stories with my parents when they're growing up. It was time of hardships, but those hardships made them strong, to be able to handle anything in life. And tell me, was like Gandhiji like a stern grandfather, or he was a soft, loving grandfather towards you?
To me, he was a very soft, loving grandfather. I know that, well, I was small when I saw him, only 7 years old. And so and I didn't give him occasion to scold me or to, be stern with me. So I didn't see that side of his life. But I know that other people older than me did see that, he was very particular about rules and regulation in the ashram. If anybody broke those rules, he would look at how to deal with it. And often the way he dealt with it is he would go on a fast. He would punish himself, which would make us ashamed, of doing something wrong, and atone for whatever we did and change. And that is an important thing. You don't change because somebody punishes you, but you change because you realize that it's wrong and you atone for it. And particularly when you see that your grandfather is suffering, he's going on a fast, then you really realize, that this is not something I want to repeat.
That's so true. Because even I had a strict dad, and there's something about them, that discipline teaches you how to not only be stronger in life, but to also, as you said, look at the things that you need to change to do something better. Tell me, is there any special memories or moments with Gandhiji that you had with him he's your grandfather and you the granddaughter?
Oh, I spent only 3 months with him. And so my memory is about, when we went there to this ashram, things were very, very difficult. It was 1947. India was, on the verge of getting independence. And, there were sort of negotiations going on between the British and the Congress Party. And there was also the partition, which was very painful for my grandfather. He wasn't happy at all about the partition of India. But, despite all that, um, people still continued at the ashram, the daily life had to continue. But what happened is that people then, tried to make things easier. So, for instance, they would cook pumpkin every day because it was easier to cook pumpkin and to grow pumpkin than to, cut green beans or other vegetables, So, in our diet, every day we used to get pumpkin. And after about 2 or 3 days, I went and told my grandfather, you should have named this place Pumpkin Land instead of Sevagram, Sevagram is land of service. And so as a kid, I told him that, and he laughed, but he asked me why. Why are you saying this? So he didn't know what was being cooked in the kitchen every day because he had a special diet of his own. He wasn't eating, the food that was cooked and all that. He was eating nuts and fruit and things like that. So he didn't know about this. And when he heard my story, he just didn't, laugh at it and forget about it. That same evening, he went to the prayer, and in front of the whole village, he told everybody that, look, when I talk about simplicity, it doesn't mean that you have to eat pumpkin every day. You got to change and have other things. And, he gave a whole sermon on this idea that you don't, um, uh, eat one thing every day. And so, that brought about changes in the ashram. But for me, when I think about it going back, is how quickly he reacted to something that a little child told him. We often, as parents, I myself, sometimes don't listen to the little kids and what they are saying. You play with them, but you don't really listen to all the complaints that they make and all that sort of thing. So to me, it was an amazing thing, that he heard what I said, he listened to me, and he acted on what I said. He didn't just forget about it. And I think that that's a very important lesson for parents and for teachers and for all of us going forward, that we should listen and we should act, because it's by acting immediately that you curb a problem that can get worse. And so, that's something that we are looking at in our country, in the world today, that people don't react that quickly.
That is so true. That is so true. Even my guru even said in one of his satsangs too, there's a problem, try to resolve it immediately before it gets worse. And when it becomes to a point where you can't resolve it, and then there's many layers to it, and then it's even harder. That's such a simple example, but there's so much beauty and simplicity in that example that you gave that has such a profound message to it. So thanks for sharing about that. Um, so tell me, like, Gandhiji ended up becoming a historical figure because of the values he taught. And he tried to fight for human rights. and for the independence of India as well. What do you think were like aspects of him and his movement and his message or values or personality that you think was most misunderstood and underappreciated by people?
I think for me, there are two very important things that Gandhiji, taught and that he believed in. Number one is the value of all religions. Gandhiji himself was a highly religious person, spiritual person, but he wasn't, kind of an extremist where he believed that my religion is the best religion and it's the only religion that counts in the world. I mean, that is not what he believed in. He felt that every religion has a message and we enrich our own belief system by looking at other religions and learning from them. You don't have to convert to another religion, but if you see something good in another religion, you look at your own religion and you'll find that good somewhere. In your scriptures, you'll find the same message which has been hidden away for some reason, but it's there. All these messages are in all our scriptures. And so to look at, and each religion emphasizes particular, issues that they think are important for them. And so if we, look at all the religions and learn from them, we are enriching ourselves. Our own outlook is broadened, and we enrich the world through that, because you show to the world that even though we are diverse, and all of us, there's no two human beings who are the same. Even parents and children, they are not the same. Each one has their own personality, and there are millions of us in the world, with each one having a different personality. And so, if we look at religions, they too have different sort of outlooks, but when you bring them together, it makes a beautiful harmony. If you think of it in those terms, instead of distorting them and creating disharmony, you can bring them together and create harmony. And it's the same with people. If you bring people together and enrich yourself through, sharing and learning from each other, you broaden your own thinking, your own horizon, and you lead a better life because you now are appreciating every human being. You're respecting every person. And that is what my grandfather did. He respected the children. And that respect was what made him listen to what I had to say when I was a child, a 7-year-old child. And he was prepared to listen and learn something new, because he didn't know what was being cooked in the kitchen. And he learned that from me. It could be other people would say, she carried tales and things like that. But as a little child, you did it innocently. You didn't carry tales. And my grandfather understood that. And, he acted on that because out of respect even for a child. And so I think that if we as human beings learn that respect, we wouldn't have so much of violence in the world. And then his second contribution was the whole question of nonviolent action. So you don't just respect or, love people. And that's the end of story. You try to bring about changes in the world so that we can really live in peace and harmony. How do you do that? And the culture of nonviolence was what he began to look at. How can you live a nonviolent way of life? And a nonviolent way of life is where you learn to control your anger, you learn to control your emotions, you learn to, to develop uh, ways of building rather than ways of destroying.
That is a very beautiful message. It makes me think about his famous line that he used to say, be the change you wish to see in the world, that everybody uses it. And it's my favorite line. It's because in order for us to want change in the world, we have to start by being that change. And that's when everything changes. So that's very beautiful teaching of his. And, I know they call it his nonviolent movement, which was satyagraha, right? And it was also translated as like a way of truth, a truth force in this world. And it is a way of life, of being courageous, nonviolent pursuit of truth rooted in love and compassion, as you said. And it called on individuals to resist injustice. And as you said, not with anger, but with moral conviction and inner strength that unite individuals. And as you said, instead of dividing them. So tell me, with that in mind, Mama Ella, how do you interpret and live out this principle in your own activism?
Well, look, I'm not, I am granddaughter of Mahatma Gandhi, but I'm not Mahatma Gandhi. So I haven't reached that level. I'm still trying, I have lots of faults and lots of weaknesses, but we try our best to do the things that he taught us to do. And so the first thing for me is that you must be conscious that these are the principles that you should live by. And you try to get to those, to live by those principles. But there are times when we make mistakes. There are times when we lapse, you get angry, you make mistakes, do things that you shouldn't have done. But the beauty of life is to know that you have done something wrong and to correct it.
That's true. But I think you being so humble, Mama Ella, because from the time I've known you in all these years, you've just been an amazing person. And I know the work that you continuously try to do, in the interfaith space. So let's talk about a little bit about your work because I think it's very inspiring. I know you're involved in the interfaith space with Religions for Peace South Africa, the Kwa-Zulu Natal Interreligious Council, and also the Gandhi Development Trust. So, can you tell me a bit of your work in these organizations and what you try to aim to do in terms of peace building? Because I know you play a very important, valuable role, not only as a senior religious woman, but also as a faith leader and somebody who inspires society as well, and especially the youth as well.
Okay, so I'll start with the Religions for Peace. It was I think it was 1894, 93, somewhere around there in the early, no, 1984. Sorry, I got the figures wrong. 1984. That I was first approached by the Secretary General of, it was called WCRP at that time, Council for Religions for Peace. And he asked, if I would like to help to set up a branch, of WCRP in South Africa. And he also approached Bishop Tutu and others. But at that time, things were very difficult in South Africa. And for myself, I had just, my banning orders were just lifted, banning and house arrest orders. So, but I didn't have a passport. And so I couldn't go out of the country. But we got people together like Paddy Carney and, other faith leaders and so on. And I had worked with them all along, even before we started the interfaith movement officially from, and sort of became part of the international body. In South Africa itself, we had worked together. Perikani, that's the Diaconia Council of Churches, and the Hindu religion, the Muslim, Islamic faith. We had people who were part of the political organization. And at that time, nobody looked at, whether what religion you belong to. We worked together as brothers and sisters in the movement. And there was no differences. And nobody was, sort of offensive about other people's religions or anything like that. There were no differences. We were very much cohesive at that time. And so it was quite easy to form a branch, quite a big branch of WCRP in South Africa. We had a number of bishops who were part of it, and, Brother Ramparos was there from the Hindu organizations. And there were many others, Pandit Sukla, who is now, ambassador in India. He was also part of this organization in the early days, and Paddy Meskin and many others. And we worked very closely together in order to look, and at that time, things were difficult. As I said, I was just, released from a house arrest order. And there were many people who were being detained, arrested, during that time. So, but, the religious community played a big role in the marches and in the defiance campaigns, non-violent campaigns in South Africa. So part of our work was, being part of this religious group. And as we went ahead towards 1990, when things were about changing, it was WCRP that brought all the religious groups, the heads, the religious heads together to write up a charter of rights and responsibilities of religious communities. And it was at that time also that a lot of the African churches were looking at Black theology. So looking at, and as you know, that, apartheid was based on an understanding of Christianity, which said that there were certain people who were superior to others. It was a misunderstanding, but that is the interpretation that led to the superiority of the white races. And Black theology countered that notion. And so, we all began to look at those kinds of things and built up this charter, religious charter of religious rights and responsibilities. So, and that was taken into our constitution. It forms part of our constitution as a document, a base document, which then led to the CRL commission, to look at how different religious groups can work together and so on. So that was our contribution at that time to the struggle through the religious communities and, to contributing to this charter of rights and responsibilities. Going further, there was the Bishops' Conference that also drew attention to the many atrocities that were committed by the apartheid government. They went and they had, as bishops, they had, leeway to go and investigate and see what was happening. And they found they wrote up a whole list of things that were being done by the apartheid government and exposed them. And that was one of the key things that came out of, this bishops' conference and the work that they did. And to complement that, we had the Detainee Support Committee, a committee that would look at, how we could support the families of people who were detained, what we could do for those who were detained whilst in detention, to make sure that these people are in the spotlight. And if you kill them, we would know, like they did with Steve Biko, for instance. But, while some of them did get away with those kinds of things, torture and killings and all that, there were many people who could have been tortured and killed. But, because of the work that the religious communities did, they were saved from that sort of thing. So it was quite an important part of the work. Coming back to the changes, once we got freedom in the country, things changed and we had to look for new ways of working. And I think we are still struggling at looking at new ways of coming together. Although in South Africa, we can say we are one country where there's very little religious strife. It is happening. There is differences. There are extremists in this country in all religions. And, but, there are more people who are for interfaith than those who are against interfaith work. So in that respect, I think South Africa and the interfaith community is playing a big role.
That's so true. And if you look at South Africa too, in the broader context, most of our problems were apartheid through racism and also poor service delivery. So for us, we were a little more fortunate in the terms of religion, where we had more of an Ubuntu, and we have more of an interfaith vibe that thrives. So tell me, and it's so interesting to hear about this, how the development of Religions for Peace South Africa was created, because I've been involved in the organization for since 2013, but to understand the context and the history of it, it's very, very interesting, to understand it. And how did the KZN Interreligious Council also develop from that aspect? Was it before the Religions for Peace South Africa, or it came afterward?
No, it came afterwards. It came KZN Interreligious Council only started sometime in the I think it was after the elections and everything. Um, I think it was in the second term, so 19 around the beginning of 2000. So it's not a very old organization, the KZN Interreligious Council. What happened is that the provincial, premier then asked the religious community, they asked RFP to come, and then they also had other people there who were not part of RFP but were part of religious organizations. And then they suggested that we form, that we join a group that the premier was putting together. And so many of us who went there, we said, no, we have an interfaith group. And we don't want to be bound to the government. We want to be independent. So, then the IRC was formed because of, out of that initiative from the Premier's office. And it comprised mainly of leaders. Now, the difference between RFP and IRC was that many of the leaders of the different religious communities didn't have the time to spend with the RFP activities. Because by that time, what RFP was doing is, working with schools, working with this ECD sector, early childhood development, and doing things, developmental sort of work in the country. And the leaders were too busy to come in and work at that level. So there were two sort of streams, one is the activists in the different faiths who got together and did these things, and then the leadership of the different religious groups who formed the IRC. And so we had those two streams of work, although because, the active people in the IRC were the people who belonged to RFP. So they became the secretariat. They ran everything, IRC activities, and, kept records and did all kinds of work. But the face was the face of religious leaders.
Okay, so I'm just trying to like understand it a little better. So Religions for Peace South Africa was more like grassroots level community work, and the Interreligious Council was more at a governmental religious level. So it contained all
not governmental,
not governmental.
but
Okay,
just religious leadership
just
of the religious.
just religious. So it contains all the senior religious leaders, and that's how they promote peace building.
Yeah, so rabbis and, bishops and so on, pundits, and all of them were part of the IRC. We, like Paddy Miskin, I, Zaydun, who were part of the IRC at that time, we went there as part of RFP. Because none of us, Zaydun is not a imam or anything. Paddy Miskin was not a rabbi, and I'm not anything in the Hindu religion. I don't hold office like that.
Oh, okay. All right. I understand. That makes more
But
sense.
we were the secretariat who did the work. Not me so
Mm.
much, but Zaidun and Tariq Miskin did the work there.
Okay. And but both organizations work towards peace building, towards promoting the interfaith space, and also can you like highlight any specific like milestone or goals that were achieved by both organizations?
Well, on the climate issue, Archbishop Tutu played a very big role, and we had the big conference out here and signed we had a big rally as well, where we played a big role in promoting consciousness of, environmental issues. And so that was one of the big achievements, very big achievement. Nationally, that was done. The other achievements are, little sort of promoting interfaith work in schools, amongst the youth, getting them to understand what interfaith work means. Running the nursery school in, forgot the name of the place, but in a rural area where those children were, really needed something. We were able to provide that service for those children. So it was like, it for them it was a big thing. It's now built up, with the help of RFP. They've got classrooms there for, the junior grade R students. They've got a good nursery school for the children out there, which is, which is something that South Africa needs. And the religious community was able to deliver on that, which shows the partnership between civil society and government. And that's a partnership that we need to build. And I think the national dialogue is looking at building that partnership again, because we lost the plot in the last 30 years. We drew apart civil society on the one side and government on the other side, and not meeting, not, looking at each other's needs or anything like that. And so we have what we have at the present moment, a fragmented society, a government that's not delivering, and very few people going to elections. In 1994, 90% of our people went to vote. And today, this past elections, not even 40% go out to vote. So what happens to the other 60%? Why are they not voting, And that, I think that is the national dialogue, and we need to work on it at every level, whether it's youth, religion. Everyone needs to come into it and look at what role we can play together in order to achieve the kind of things that we were able to achieve in the past.
That is so true. And I remember the project you spoke about. It was called the Mavela Ekaya project. Yes, because I went with Seydun a couple of times and with Mark as well to visit the place. And we did some interfaith youth climate projects there. So I do remember that project. But what would you say is like the missing gap in this whole thing in terms of like I remember with Religions for Peace, one of the main approach to the interfaith space is a multi-sectorial, multi-stakeholder, and multilateralism concept, so that all religions are working together. We're working with civil society, we're working with governments, we're working with people in society that, so it's a more of an inclusive way of approaching peace building. What would you say is the gap in South Africa? I know you mentioned the national dialogue as well. So maybe you can share some like solutions for this for South Africa.
National dialogue is meant to look for the solutions, solutions that people can give, So we're not looking at something that comes from the top down, that we know the answers, and you do this and you do that, and we'll have a better society. It doesn't work that way. It's when it comes from the people themselves. And if you draw an example, when we had the mass democratic struggle, when we had UDF, it was the people themselves who came, volunteered to come into these organizations and play a role. And even though it was so dangerous, you can get arrested and all that, people came together. And people worked, and leaders of churches, leaders of religious communities put their arms together and walked in the front lines of, the marches that we used to have. And so the thing is that, if we could come together at that time to get peace, to get freedom in this country, why can't we come together to make sure that our government works properly? That government is not an alien government. It's not coming from somewhere else. It's our people. It's people that we elected into that government. It's people who were born in this country. They're not from any other country. So why is it that we are having this problem? And that is what I think we need to think about. For me, that is the big issue. And, Gandhiji said, I'm not sure whether it was Gandhiji or somebody else, but they said that a government of a country reflects the people, the sort of ethos in the community itself. So whatever, if we go and complain about the government, we need to complain about the society as well. Our society is what it is, and therefore our government is what it is. So we need to change both. We need to change our society, and by changing our society, we'll have a better government, and it'll run better, and it'll deliver on the services.
That's so true, right? Um, just going back a little bit to what you spoke about, because we're talking about South Africa and, it's in democracy from apartheid as well. I remember when I was in school, the most famous story that I learned about in terms of Gandhiji, he was thrown off a train in South Africa. And at that moment, it sparked his journey of nonviolent resistance. Can you share a little bit about that? I mean, as a child, or as a granddaughter of Gandhiji, how did that affect you, and what did that teach you? But also, you said you were also under house arrest. How did apartheid affect you as well at that time?
So apartheid had a very, very strong, effect on people, because we saw the brutality of apartheid. And what we are seeing around the world today in many places, and particularly, when you look at what's happening in Gaza, you see the atrocities that are happening, which are so similar to what we suffered in this country at that time. where people could be just detained. You could be picked up from the street. You had no rights as a human being. You didn't have the right to a fair trial or anything like that. And it was mob rule, or kind of army rule. And so when we compare that, time during apartheid, and we see why, we had to bring about changes to that, the effect that it had on our lives, not only what we suffered, but what we see other people suffer. For instance, growing up at Phoenix Settlement, we grew up amongst, many African people in that area. Africans and Indians were living together, but um, the pass laws applied to African people. It didn't apply to Indian people. And the pass laws were absolutely brutal. We used to see how the police would come and raid the neighboring area, which is now called Mumbai. They would go into this area. At that time, it was called New Farm. And there were a lot of African families there. And we would hear 2 o'clock in the morning, there are police dogs and policemen coming into that area, and women and children screaming, trying to, get away from the police, hiding in sugar fields and things like that. And then the vans, police vans, going away filled with arrests of people who didn't have passes on them. You know, they might have left it in the rural areas or something, and the pass had to be current. That means that your pass every day, every month, your employer has to sign the pass. And so, you show that you've got a job and this is your employer. And if the employer hasn't signed, then you are supposed to go back to the rural areas, not to stay in these urban areas. And, Inanda became an urban area. And so it was a rural area, but then they made it an urban area. And so they used to come and, and the next morning we'll hear of children who were bitten by the dogs, women who were bitten by the dogs, men who were assaulted, coming to the clinic, which we used to run at Phoenix Settlement. And it was painful to see this atrocities committed against innocent people. So, we had to do something about it. And that was the motivating factor for us to work towards bringing about change. Today, we see brutality in our country, and we see brutality overseas. And as people who went through that kind of a system, it is our duty, and Mandela said so, that we have to stand by oppressed people in the world. Anyone who is oppressed, we have to stand by them. So, today we have to stand not only, oppressed people around the world, but when, for instance, here, when people who come from other countries are being turned away from hospitals, not being given treatment, that is a real crime. And something has to be done about it. It's not South African, our constitution protects everybody. So whoever is doing that is a crime. You can't prevent a person who is ill and requires medical attention from getting it from a hospital.
That's true. We've come from a very rich history of a lot of suffering.
We are causing suffering to other people. If you look at the Jewish people, they suffered so much in the Holocaust. You go to the museum and you see. But what are they now doing? The government is now doing to the Palestinians. Why can't there be peace between the two countries? I mean, they occupied Palestine. And if, part of Palestine, which is now Israel, called Israel, which was part of Palestine in the past, is, instead of being grateful and living peacefully, they are becoming aggressive towards the Palestinians, which is wrong. I think it's, and Gandhiji said so too, that they have a right now, they don't have a homeland, the Israeli people. And so, if they were given a place and they have lived there for so many years, live in peace with other people. Came to this country, and we as Indians from India, we were forcibly brought here, most of the people,
Mm,
but
that's true.
some came of their own will. But if we now grab part of the land and say it's ours, as the whites did in the past during apartheid, that was wrong. And they realized it. And they have changed. Many of them have changed. So if they can change and live together now, why can't the Israelis do the same?
It's interesting, huh? It's like it's almost humanity doesn't always learn from the past, and we repeat our mistakes, but in different ways. And we hurt each other, and yet we all come from. We are humans at the end of the day that's living on this planet. And if you look at it, the reference to it in Hinduism, if you look at everyone in terms of their Atma and their souls, the Atma has no class, division, race, nothing. And we all are part and parcel of God, the Para Atma. So we should be able to strive and live for that kind of peace. But it's sad to just see what is happening around the world.
Mm.
So tell me more about your work at the Gandhi Development Trust. What do you do in terms of the kind of community work you'll do? Are you like still honor Gandhiji's legacy in terms of the Satyagraha movement? I know you do have the Peace Walk, and I attended that when I was in high school. It was amazing because I was there. We walked from Phoenix Gandhi settlement to the Suncoast Casino. And I remember that time you brought down Red Indians and they walked with us on their horses. It was such a beautiful experience. And it was the first time I did the whole entire walk. So tell us more about the Gandhi Development Trust, their work, and even about the Peace Walk as well.
So the Gandhi Development Trust started in 2002. And the basis for it was that we wanted to promote Gandhian ideas. At that time, Phoenix settlement wasn't as active. And I'll tell you the story of Phoenix settlement afterwards. So we felt that there was a need for Gandhi Development Trust. to promote the ideas. And we looked at ways of doing it. One way was we started the Satyagraha newspaper, and that used to be printed once a month. I don't know if you saw copies of that. We carried on for about 10 years with Satyagraha. Then we were forced to close because of financial difficulties and so on. We also, had awards where we would bring people together, again, looking at past history. And, in these award ceremonies, we collected histories of people, individuals who had contributed to the struggle, and from different sectors, whether it was, they were not all involved directly in politics. Some were involved in civic work, others were involved in religious work, and so on. So there were many people who received awards over the period. And the idea was to again, promote Gandhian ideas of satyagraha in giving those awards. Then we also had essay competition in schools, speech and essay competition, where we targeted high school and primary school, and they would write, essays on issues pertaining to Gandhian thought. So through, having these competitions, we would encourage children to read and to research in order to write their essays or make the speeches on Gandhian ideas. So that was the youth, you know, um, sort of target group. Then we had the adult target group, and then we had Satyagraha, which was for the community at large. Most stories related to communities, and it also gave Gandhian ideas and so on. So, and then we had the Salt March. The Salt March started in when we had, I think it was 2005. In 2005, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Freedom Charter, which was in 1955. So 2005 was 50 years. And we celebrated the 75th anniversary of the Salt March. It happened in the same year, the 50th anniversary. And so that's why we have Chief Albert Luthuli, who was the president of ANC and who oversaw this Freedom Charter program, and Gandhiji, who started the Salt March in India. Salt March was one of the biggest demonstrations. It involved millions of people around India, and it actually caused the British to then begin to look at resolution of what was happening in India, the colonization of India. So we thought that it was appropriate to team the two together, our struggle and the Indian struggle, and then to have this kind of a mock, march, which wasn't a salt march as such, but it was a resistance march, you can say, which showed that this is a peaceful way of dealing with issues. You rather demonstrate peacefully than have violent confrontation. But also the march itself took the message of Gandhi. You would have seen in the banners, non-violence, and peace, and both of Gandhiji and of the Freedom Charter. That South Africa belongs to all who live in it, that South Africa will make sure that there's peace in Africa, all over Africa. And so we used to have the military coming there as well to say that you are supposed to be peacekeepers and not warmongers. Don't go and create war anyway. You are supposed to bring peace in Africa and in this country. So that was the message to the Defense Force. And so they used to come. And I don't know if you remember them leading the march out of Phoenix at that time, yeah. And then the Red Indian, they had come. They have, every year they celebrate the June, what do they call the solstice? The shortest day in the world, 15th of June, I think it is. So they celebrate that as a day of peace. And they have peace events all over the world. So in that year, when they were here, they decided to come to South Africa, and they had a peace prayer at the temple in Phoenix, and they had a peace prayer at Phoenix Settlement with the community, Indian and African communities together at Phoenix at that time. So that brings the history of Phoenix. Phoenix, as I said, was established in 1904, and it was a 100-acre piece of land on which families, who believed in the same philosophy that Gandhiji believed in, came and dedicated their lives to the community and to simplicity, communal living, and so on at Phoenix Settlement. So that's how Phoenix started, on 100 acres of land. And then over time, there weren't so many families living on the settlement, but the settlement used to run a newspaper, and the newspaper and the settlement, sort of survived through the farming activities. So we had a sugar farm. Part of the land was under sugarcane. Part of the land was cultivated with, crops, garden crops. And we had hundreds of trees of mangoes there, and so on. And that's what sustained Phoenix Settlement. But in 1985, when there was a big riot, in Inanda, and I'm not sure, nobody's done a research, but from my understanding, what had happened is that the people in Phoenix, they saw a Phoenix Township developing, and they had schools, they had water, electricity, good roads, and everything. And on this side of the road, they had nothing, no water, as a result of which typhoid broke out in that area, cholera broke out in Inanda because they had no water, no proper sanitation, refuse removal services, and so on. So, then in 1985, it seems, this is what I heard, that somebody came and made a speech in Inanda. There a large number of Inanda people were attending this meeting. And they said that for as long as the Indian people live here, you won't get any services. It's only when the Indians leave Inanda that an authority will take over and this area will be declared for African people, and then there will be development. So, incensed by those kinds of messages, people then, began to, um, decide that we should drive the Indians out of here, even though Indians had lived peacefully in the area. But between the 70s and 80s, a lot of new people had come into Inanda. And Inanda was highly populated by other people, new people. And so they didn't have the same friendship that the old residents had with the Indian people. And in fact, when they were driving the Indian people out, it was the old residents, some of them, who gave shelter to some of the Indian families and took belongings of the Indian people, kept it there, and gave it to them afterwards. So, those stories haven't been told about how some of the African people protected Indians. So, it's not just about race, it's a bigger picture there. Anyway, Phoenix Settlement was also then burnt down. All the buildings were burnt down and occupied. And then over the years from 85 to now, we had negotiations with the people who had occupied the place. And we agreed to give 80% of the land to the city council to build proper housing for the African people and for them to move out of the heritage site. And then the heritage site was only redeveloped in 2000 and opened by President Mbeki. But the funding was given by the President of India and our president, our government. Both governments contributed to the rebuilding of the Phoenix settlement. So
Wow,
now
what an
the
amazing
museum,
history.
yeah, and now we have a museum there. And because, over the years, I mean, there was this, difference in economic difference. Very poor people living outside Phoenix settlement, and Phoenix settlement had developed over the years. Now it had electricity and water and so on, surrounded by virtually like informal settlement. And so those people, regarded Phoenix as a palace in the middle of the poverty, And so there wasn't a very good relationship between the neighbors and Phoenix. And over time, we began to have programs with the community to build that relationship. So now we have a computer center there, which provides computer skills to the local community. And it was started by a teacher from Phoenix, Mr. Kublal, who came and trained initially. And then from the youth that were trained, he identified two people who now run the internet cafe and the computer training. And those two people were students previously, trained now from the local community and got a job at Phoenix and run that center. So we try to employ local people and train them as well, and also to provide other skills. They themselves, the people who are working at Phoenix, they are supposed to be working Monday to Friday. They started a Saturday morning, classes for children. And it started again with Mr. Kublal. But later on, they took on. So now we have a reading club, a book club. We have a film club there. We have yoga classes. Um, and we have some people are giving tuition to students who require, who want tuition in maths and English and so on. We also have, sewing classes which are going to be started very soon. And then we have like career day when we, ask them to come and introduce them to other, to the tertiary institutions where, whatever career that the students can follow. We also have events over there, various celebrations like Women's Day, Youth Day. We have Gandhiji's birth anniversary. We have the Salt March that starts over there. Now we don't go to Durban. The Salt March goes to Phoenix, Gandhi Lutuli Peace Park. So it's only 5 kilometers. But people gather at Phoenix in the morning and we do that. So we have a number of programs.
Wow, that's
Many
amazing.
programs. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I mean, the best work I discovered in peace building and with communities at the grassroots levels. And it makes a lot of change in the communities. So yeah, that's so wonderful to hear. But also it's so wonderful to learn and discover about our past and our history and the struggles we had and where we are to where we are today and how far we've come as a nation, but also how much more we need to go in order in terms of peace building. And, looking at the current state of the world, we are in a lot of turmoil at the moment at a worldly level. So, coming to that, it's been a beautiful conversation with you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for being with me on this podcast, for sharing so much insight, so much teachings, learnings as well of Gandhiji, your life's journey and stuff. And I think I would like to end up by asking you a question in terms of, this is the month of August of Women Honoring Women. What message would you like to give young women and youth out there who are seeking to make a difference in the world? Yeah, what would your message be to them?
I think we need to promote, the end of patriarchy. Patriarchy is the real problem that is affecting us today, where, people have different roles. People assume, that this is what a woman should be doing. This is what a man should be doing. Then you also promote through media and through other, avenues, the image of a macho man. And then every man tries to become that, strong person. And so GBV occurs because, when you don't obey, or he finds that he's a little bit, overpowered or something, then he becomes aggressive. And, aggression is being promoted in our society in many ways. We are aggressive. We want retribution. All the time. So that mindset has to change, and women are best placed to begin to change that because many of us are mothers, and as mothers, we can make a difference in the next generation. Um, Many of us do have a very strong influence on the male in our life. on the males in our life, and we can begin to exert that influence. And not in an aggressive way, but in a loving way, and change people's mindset to begin to look at the world in a different way. And it's only when we start looking at the world from the mothers' and women's perspective that we'll have peace in the world.
That is really beautiful. And for the youth as well, what would be your message for them?
Well, I think, it's the same message to the youth. Begin to make a difference. Whilst, one of the things that we promote at Phoenix is that being simple, having simple pleasures is not being boring, because you're still enjoying life. A simple walk is enjoyment. A picnic gives you so much of enjoyment. Take the same food that you are eating in your home. Go and sit in a garden and eat with other people, maybe, friends, relatives, family, whatever it is. But that is enjoyment. And that kind of enjoyment is enriching enjoyment, not enjoyment by escaping into alcohol, into drugs, into doing things that modern life is teaching us to do. Try to move away from those things and go back to your roots, because it's those simple things that we do that brings far greater enjoyment in life than the things that modern life does.
That's so true and that's so deep. Thank you for that. So thank you so much. I really enjoyed having you on this podcast. You are an inspiration to us, the legacy of Gandhiji, and you're doing amazing work in the community, and we honor you for that. And so, yeah, I'm so glad you could be on my podcast. I really wanted you to be here because I wanted to honor you for the month of Women's Month. So, and it's so wonderful to hear about your journey, about your life, and the simple teachings and wisdom that you bring from your life's journey. So, thank you so much. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Okay. So,
Okay. Bye-bye.
take care.
Sorry for coming late.
Oh, it's okay. It's totally okay. I'm just so glad you're here and you could be here, and I'm truly grateful for it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.